The darkness before dawn has become the preferred time for federal drug enforcement operations across America, and what happened on December 28, 2025, represents one of the most significant strikes against methamphetamine production in recent history. The Drug Enforcement Administration announced they had dismantled what they're calling a superlab network that was manufacturing methamphetamine on an industrial scale. And the numbers tell a story that should concern every American. Federal agents raided multiple locations across 3 states, arrested 27 individuals, and seized approximately 3 tons of methamphetamine, along with the equipment and chemicals used to produce it. To understand what 3 tons actually means, we're talking about 6,000 pounds of methamphetamine, enough drugs to supply millions of doses to users across the country, and the manufacturing capacity that DEA discovered suggests this network was capable of producing even larger quantities on an ongoing basis. The coordinated raids happened across California, Arizona, and Nevada, and these weren't small operations hidden in residential basements. These locations included what DEA describes as superlabs, which are large-scale methamphetamine manufacturing facilities capable of producing hundreds of pounds of drugs per production cycle. According to the DEA's announcement, the operation resulted in the arrest of 27 individuals who were charged with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine. The lead defendants include Mexican nationals with alleged connections to the Sinaloa Cartel, as well as American citizens who were working with the cartel to operate manufacturing facilities on U.S. soil. At the raided locations, DEA agents discovered active methamphetamine laboratories in various stages of production. Some labs were in the middle of cooking batches of meth when agents arrived. Others had just completed production and were in the process of packaging finished product for distribution. The total seizure from all 7 locations was staggering. DEA agents seized approximately 3 tons of finished methamphetamine ready for distribution. They also seized over 2,000 pounds of precursor chemicals that are used to manufacture methamphetamine, which represents the raw materials for producing even more drugs. And they seized manufacturing equipment, including industrial-scale glassware, heating elements, ventilation systems, and other apparatus used in large-scale drug production. The locations of these superlabs varied in ways that show how sophisticated these operations have become. 2 were in rural areas of California's Central Valley, hidden in agricultural warehouses that appeared from the outside to be legitimate farm operations. 2 were in industrial areas of the Phoenix, Arizona metropolitan area, operating inside what appeared to be small manufacturing or storage facilities. And 3 were in remote desert locations in Nevada in structures specifically built or modified for drug manufacturing. DEA Acting Administrator Timothy Shea stated in the announcement that this operation has dealt a significant blow to the Sinaloa Cartel's methamphetamine production capabilities in the United States. All 27 arrested individuals were taken into federal custody and are being held without bond due to the serious nature of the charges and the flight risk they pose. Many of them face mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years to life in federal prison if convicted, given the quantities of drugs involved. The DEA stated that this investigation was part of Operation Crystal Shield, a nationwide initiative targeting methamphetamine trafficking and the criminal organizations behind it. But these superlabs in December 2025 weren't the only major enforcement actions happening across the country. At the border crossings, officers have been discovering increasingly sophisticated methods of smuggling narcotics into the United States. At one crossing, a fuel tanker being driven by a pre-approved driver with a fast pass was stopped when suspicious shapes in the driver's sleeping compartment showed up in an X-ray. Officers immediately spotted irregularities, including a 4-inch difference between the sleeper and the cab. The sleeper was supposed to be standing on airbags, but for some reason they were taken off. The cab had been modified to create a hidden storage area beneath the driver's bed, and officers discovered 30 packages inside this secret compartment. Using laser analysis, the testing kit identified the substance as 100% cocaine. When weighed, the total came to 34.56 kilograms of cocaine. Even if the driver was coerced by a criminal gang, he's likely to be facing significant jail time. That bust alone took drugs with an estimated street value of over $1 million out of the hands of the cartels and their dealers. 130 miles away at the Camino Royale Bridge, officers found a white crystalline substance on the back of a pickup truck that tested positive for meth. The driver claimed to have forgotten her insulin and was rushed to the hospital in danger of collapsing from high blood sugar, but officers were undeterred and began their inspection of the fuel tank. A broken fuel pump immediately grabbed their attention because even if it did turn on, it wouldn't suck any fuel because it didn't have a pipe that goes inside. The tank was full to the brim with diesel, but with no working pump to get it out. Officers realized the drug smugglers had simply dumped the meth directly into the fuel, meaning the drug would be permanently contaminated. Almost half of all drug seizures in the U.S. involve meth, and it is a highly profitable market worth $17 billion in the U.S. alone. Removing this contaminated fuel was a long and potentially dangerous process requiring protective equipment, and after 2 hours of siphoning out the liquid, the tank was finally running dry. 30 buckets of liquid meth. That is a lot of meth for 150 gallons of liquid meth in a diesel tank. The total seizure amount was 150 gallons, meaning this meth could have a street value of around $500,000. The Detroit Ambassador Bridge is a key trading route between the U.S. and Canada, and a lot of people think crossing the border is just about passengers, but people forget that it's the busiest land border in the northern border when it comes to trucks as well. Recently, CBP officers there have noticed a surprising trend. In the last 2 months alone, over $20 million worth of cocaine has been seized from trucks heading north into Canada. Rookie officer Gil Martin, who joined the team just 1 month ago, called in a suspicious truck for inspection. The guy stated he was coming from Wisconsin and stopped in Indiana for the night. But Wisconsin's not that far away, so there's really no need to stop right there for a whole night. Officers sent the truck for an X-ray and quickly spotted an irregularity in the cargo compartment underneath the trailer. Hidden behind the tie-down straps and blankets were 8 large boxes. When they opened them, they found bricks consistent with what they see with possible narcotics trafficking. Although the majority of seizures at this border are cocaine, the team tests the powder to confirm what they are dealing with using a device called a True Narc that detects all kinds of narcotics. The result came back as cocaine. When they package these, each one is usually a kilogram, and if this cocaine had made it into Canada, each brick could have netted the drug cartel as much as $90,000. This seizure contained over 150 bricks with a potential street value of around $15 million. The final weight was 173.2 kilograms. Even by CBP standards, this is a huge load, and the drugs will be passed on to Homeland Security investigations, who will also look into the driver's role in the trafficking. If convicted, he could be facing at least 10 years in prison. Big vehicles such as SUVs or pickup trucks have larger wheels and tires, so the cartels, if they get 2 or 3 vehicles of the same make and model, do the same compartment, and start to try and smuggle narcotics into the country. That afternoon, a driver of an SUV who claims to be visiting the U.S. for 3 days raised suspicions. She had no luggage, just high heels, a water jug, and trash. So with all the red flags, officers sent her for inspection. While the woman was detained, her vehicle was sent for an X-ray that showed anomalies on the right rear quarter panel and the left rear quarter panel. During the physical inspection, officers found missing bolts and discovered bundles hidden inside. Having found what looks like drugs, officers moved the car to a secure area to continue the search. So far, they had a total of 15 packages, but Officer Estrada suspected there was even more drugs concealed inside the spare wheel. The spare tire was definitely a red flag just because it wasn't the same. It looked like it's a different type of tire. Officers had to find a way of getting into the tire, and if there are drugs inside and a packet is broken, as well as damaging evidence, it could risk harming the officers. When they finally broke through, they found 17 packages in the tire, which seemed to be like mixed drugs because they felt different. Some looked and felt like some sort of crystal meth, and others looked like cocaine. Officers weren't convinced they found everything, though, and brought in a canine. The dog alerted to the floor of the trunk where more packages were discovered. In the exit compartment, they just found another 22 packages. Along with the 32 already found, the day's seizure totaled 54 bundles of narcotics. With the drugs hidden across multiple parts of the vehicle, officers believed there could still be more and wanted reassurance that nothing had been missed. The X-ray confirmed that the car had been completely stripped of all remaining contraband, and officers could begin processing the load. They suspected that the 3 types of packages contained 3 different types of drugs. They use a laser detection device to accurately identify each type. The Gemini tested positive for cocaine hydrochloride. From the way the next package felt, it was a little bit more crystally, so they assumed crystal meth. 2.6 million Americans ages 12 and up report using methamphetamines every year, and it accounts for the majority of deaths caused by narcotic overdoses. The test confirmed methamphetamine hydrochloride. Finally, Officer Barrera tested the cylindrical package wrapped with yellow tape, and upon removing the layers, it had a black super sticky substance. A sticky black consistency is a sign that the third drug could be heroin. If the test pouch turns green, it's a positive match, and it did. Positive for heroin, black tar. Black tar is an unrefined, impure form of heroin teeming with dangerous chemicals, and it's even more deadly to users. In total, they got 62 kilograms of drugs off the streets that day. The haul had an estimated street value of $1.7 million. While the officers had something to celebrate, the party was over for the driver of the vehicle. She was handed over to Homeland Security investigations, who will take over the case. If found guilty of trafficking such a large quantity of narcotics, she could face up to life in prison. According to DEA statistics, in fiscal year 2025, the agency seized over 43,000 pounds of methamphetamine nationwide. The 6,000 pounds seized in the Superlab operation represents approximately 14% of the annual total, which shows what a significant bust this was. However, law enforcement officials estimate that seizures represent only a fraction of the total methamphetamine being produced and distributed. If DEA is interdicting 20 to 30% of meth trafficking, that would mean total methamphetamine availability in the U.S. is somewhere in the range of 150,000 to 200,000 pounds annually or more. The human cost of methamphetamine is severe. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, methamphetamine was involved in approximately 32,000 overdose deaths in 2024. While meth is less deadly per dose than fentanyl, it causes enormous damage through addiction, health consequences, and the criminal activity associated with supporting habits. The environmental cost of methamphetamine production is also significant. Each pound of meth produced generates approximately 5 to 7 pounds of toxic waste. That means the 3 tons seized in the Superlab operation were associated with approximately 15 to 21 tons of hazardous chemical waste. When labs operate in residential or agricultural areas, this waste contaminates soil and groundwater, creating long-term environmental damage and health risks for nearby communities. Cleanup of methamphetamine labs is expensive and dangerous. It requires specialized hazmat teams to safely remove chemicals and contaminated materials. The cost to clean up a single superlab can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. For the 7 labs rated in this operation, the total cleanup cost will likely exceed several million dollars. What this Superlab takedown tells us about methamphetamine trafficking is deeply concerning. Mexican drug cartels are increasingly willing to establish large-scale manufacturing operations inside the United States, not just in Mexico. This represents a strategic shift that makes enforcement more complicated. When most meth was produced in Mexico and smuggled across the border, border security was the primary choke point where law enforcement could intercept drugs. But when cartels manufacture drugs inside the U.S., those drugs never cross the border, eliminating that enforcement opportunity. This means DEA and other agencies need to focus more resources on detecting and dismantling domestic manufacturing operations. They need to monitor chemical sales, investigate suspicious locations, and work with state and local partners who might encounter indicators of drug labs in their communities. The level of investment required to establish and operate 7 superlabs suggests that the cartels view this as a profitable long-term business strategy. They're not just smuggling drugs opportunistically, they're building infrastructure for sustained large-scale production. According to the indictment, at least 3 of the 27 arrested individuals were coordinators responsible for finding suitable locations for labs, recruiting workers, obtaining chemicals and equipment, and managing the day-to-day operations. The actual cooks, the people who manufactured the methamphetamine, were a mix of Mexican nationals with expertise in drug production and American citizens who had been trained in the manufacturing process. Operating a superlab requires real chemical knowledge and expertise. You can't just follow a recipe from the internet when you're working with industrial quantities of toxic and dangerous chemicals. According to DEA, each of the 7 labs had between 2 and 5 workers present at any given time. These workers would conduct production runs that could take anywhere from several hours to several days, depending on the quantity being produced and the specific method being used. The labs operated in cycles. Workers would bring in precursor chemicals, conduct a production run, purify and package the finished methamphetamine, clean the equipment, and then begin another cycle. A superlab operating at full capacity can produce several hundred pounds of meth per production cycle. Security was an important consideration. The labs had lookouts and surveillance cameras to watch for law enforcement or rival traffickers. Some locations had armed guards, and the operations used compartmentalization, meaning workers at one lab didn't necessarily know about the other labs, limiting the damage if one location was discovered. The finished methamphetamine was packaged in bulk quantities, typically in kilogram packages wrapped in plastic. These packages would be transported to distribution hubs where they would be broken down into smaller quantities and distributed to regional dealers throughout the southwestern United States and beyond. The financial scale of this operation was enormous. 3 tons of methamphetamine has a wholesale value of approximately $20 to $30 million, depending on purity and market conditions. At street-level retail prices broken down and sold by the gram, that 3 tons could generate over $100 million in revenue. The cartel's cost to operate these 7 superlabs would have included rent on the facilities, purchases of chemicals and equipment, salaries for workers and coordinators, transportation costs, and various other operational expenses. But even with all these costs, the profit margins on methamphetamine are extraordinarily high, which is why cartels invest heavily in manufacturing operations. The 3 tons of methamphetamine seized in this operation equals approximately 6,000 pounds, or roughly 2.7 million grams. A typical dose of methamphetamine for a user might be anywhere from 25 to 100 milligrams, depending on tolerance and method of use. That means the seized drugs represented somewhere between 27 million and 108 million individual doses. According to the DEA, the 7 superlabs they raided had a combined production capacity of approximately 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine per month when operating at full capacity. That means if these labs had continued operating undetected, they could have produced 12,000 pounds per year, or roughly 6 tons annually. From a financial perspective, the DEA estimates that this seizure represents approximately $25 to $30 million in wholesale value, or potentially over $100 million if the drugs had been broken down and sold at retail prices. Over 90% of cocaine headed to the U.S. from South America travels through Mexico, and every package that's intercepted disrupts that trade. The DEA investigation that resulted in the Superlab takedown began in early 2025. DEA agents in California had received intelligence about large-scale methamphetamine manufacturing operations in their area of responsibility. The initial intelligence came from multiple sources. Some came from informants within drug trafficking organizations who provided information about cartel operations in exchange for reduced sentences on their own charges. Some came from analysis of drug seizures, as DEA tracks the purity and chemical signatures of seized methamphetamine to identify likely sources, and some came from monitoring of communications between cartel members in Mexico and their associates in the United States. DEA investigators began focusing on a group of individuals they suspected were involved in operating manufacturing labs. They conducted surveillance documenting where these individuals went, who they met with, and what activities they were engaged in. One key technique was monitoring purchases of chemicals and equipment. Even though the P2P method doesn't use pseudoephedrine, it still requires chemicals that need to be purchased from suppliers. DEA works with chemical companies and distributors to identify suspicious purchases. When someone orders large quantities of certain chemicals that could be used in drug manufacturing, particularly if they're using false identities or shell companies to make the purchases, that can trigger DEA scrutiny. Through this monitoring, DEA identified several companies and individuals who were purchasing chemicals and equipment consistent with large-scale methamphetamine production. DEA also used aerial surveillance. When investigators suspected that labs might be operating in rural or remote areas, they would use aircraft to photograph facilities and look for indicators of drug manufacturing. These indicators might include unusual security measures, modified ventilation systems, generators providing power to buildings that aren't connected to the electrical grid, or chemical waste being disposed of improperly. In this case, DEA identified several locations in California, Arizona, and Nevada that had characteristics suggesting they might be drug labs. One particularly valuable tool was monitoring of financial transactions. The cartel members operating these labs needed to pay for chemicals, equipment, rent on facilities, salaries for workers, and various other operational costs. DEA financial investigators tracked suspicious money movements, identifying accounts that were receiving large deposits from sources connected to Mexican cartels, and then making payments to suppliers of chemicals and equipment. DEA also obtained court authorization for wiretaps on the phones of key suspects. Through intercepted communications, agents were able to hear conversations about drug production, distribution plans, and coordination with cartel leadership in Mexico. These communications provided direct evidence of the conspiracy and helped DEA understand the structure and scope of the operation. By late November 2025, DEA believed they had sufficient evidence to take down the entire network. They had identified 7 laboratory locations, 27 individuals involved in the operation, and the cartel connections behind the enterprise. The raids were carefully planned and coordinated. Taking down methamphetamine labs is inherently dangerous. The chemicals involved are toxic and explosive. Labs often have security measures, including armed guards, and the people operating labs know they're facing serious prison time if caught, which can make them desperate. DEA assembled tactical teams, including special agents trained in high-risk operations. They coordinated with local SWAT teams and with hazardous materials teams who could safely handle the toxic chemicals, and they synchronized the timing of the raids so that all 7 locations could be hit simultaneously, preventing anyone at one location from warning the others. On December 28th, the raids were executed. According to DEA, all 27 suspects were arrested without major incident. At several locations, agents arrived while meth was actively being cooked, requiring hazmat teams to stabilize the chemical reactions before agents could safely enter and gather evidence. The seized drugs, chemicals, and equipment were documented, photographed, and either secured as evidence or properly disposed of by environmental specialists. The superlabs that DEA raided in this operation were using what's known as the P2P method of methamphetamine production. This method doesn't require pseudoephedrine, which has been restricted in the United States since the passage of the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act in 2005. Instead, the P2P method uses phenyl-2-propanone and other chemicals that are harder to regulate because they have legitimate industrial uses. According to DEA, the sophistication of the labs they raided suggests they were set up and operated by individuals with significant expertise in chemistry and drug manufacturing. These weren't amateur operations. They had industrial-grade equipment, proper ventilation systems to handle toxic fumes, temperature control systems for the chemical reactions, and efficient processes for purifying the final product. The 27 individuals arrested in this operation are currently in federal custody facing serious drug manufacturing charges. Given the quantities involved, mandatory minimum sentencing laws will require that most defendants receive at least 10 years in federal prison if convicted. Many will likely face 20 years to life. Some defendants may choose to cooperate with prosecutors, providing information about cartel operations in exchange for reduced sentences. This cooperation could lead to additional investigations and potentially to the identification and prosecution of cartel leadership. The 7 laboratory locations have been shut down and are being cleaned up by environmental specialists. The contaminated materials will be safely disposed of, and the properties will need to undergo extensive remediation before they can be used for any purpose again. The 3 tons of methamphetamine seized will be destroyed. Those drugs will never reach users, will never fuel addiction, will never contribute to overdose deaths or crime. But we need to be realistic about the broader impact. This was a significant operation that dealt a blow to the Sinaloa Cartel's manufacturing capacity, but the cartel has extensive resources and will work to rebuild what was lost. They'll establish new labs, recruit new workers, and resume production. The methamphetamine problem in America is driven by demand. As long as millions of Americans want to use meth, there will be criminal organizations willing to produce and distribute it. Enforcement operations like this one are essential for disrupting trafficking and holding criminals accountable, but they need to be part of a comprehensive strategy that also includes prevention, treatment, and addressing the underlying reasons why people turn to drugs.